I've been having this thought lately that so many of life's questions can be answered based on this one. Does life have a meaning or a purpose? And like the question, is there God or not? The answer can't be known beyond our instincts and guts and maybe the nudging of our hearts. And yes, even on some level, logic. But what I mean is no one can know answers to certain questions in any way that allows them to prove it. In other words, is there a purpose and meaning to life born into it beyond the one we give it ourselves? Were we born with a soul to save, to create some kind of masterpiece of time with, to commune with God across many trials and tribulations in a landscape of senseless violence, abject poverty, psychopaths on fleek, running shit out here in a world that is also breathtakingly beautiful, inspired, full of godly smiles on babies' faces, and oceanic celebration, housed in bodies that make the question of a creator kind of obvious, at least from my point of view. It seems like we're created. We don't seem to be accidents of evolution and survival, but rather sources of divine communion living in the strange jungle called Earth. I read that suicide rates are at an all-time high. 39,255 men took their lives this year, 49,500 total. 75% of those were white people. Not making this about race, but that is a rather alarming statistic. What we seem to have is a crisis of purpose, a crisis of faith, a crisis of meaning, and the ability to see a reason to endure the crisis of life that is innate in being alive. Stuck in the realm of our minds, or just getting by in a world that inundates us with visions of success and people endlessly winning and making it look easy to do that on one side of the equation, coupled with stories of unbelievable suffering, cruel and senseless acts of violence, and war on the other side. Seems like a cocktail for hopelessness if ever there was one. Which brings us back to the question, does life have a purpose beyond mere survival? And if so, what is it and how do we find it? Well, I can only speak from my perspective, obviously, but the older I get, there's a plane going by, and the more the challenges of life build, the question of God graduates from a question we freak ourselves out with while smoking weed with friends, wow, is there God, to the central question of life, the question I start my days with and build my hours around. Upon waking up, my mind invariably shifts to ask, are you there, God? It's me, Joseph. I seek to shift my point of view to a place beyond my mind or my thinking, to the silent space of observation in the here and the now. Buddhists call it being present. Christians call it seeking the Father. Christians, I think, see it as a personal connection whereby the Creator is in some way helping them, or us, I'm one of them, through the trials of their lives. Whereas Buddhists and Hindus perhaps have a more self-empowered viewpoint, aka, I am God. I'm riffing here. If I'm getting this wrong, cut me slack. I'm just sharing my perspective. Could be wrong about all of this. I feel like Christians have more of a dependency relationship with the source of all things, whereas Buddhists are more godlike themselves when tapping into the source. Obviously, there's tons of overlap. Christians work through forgiveness and repentance to have Christ consciousness born within, or to put it another way, overcome the ego so that Christ himself can be born again from within. Well, regardless of your mode or belief, what is important to relate to the spiritual realm, it's important to relate to the spiritual realm, to seek connection beyond the ego or the mind or thinking and the mechanics of mere survival. But to understand we have a spiritual purpose here, to travel beyond self-concern and be of service to another. We understand that we need food, water, and air to survive. But as these suicide rates soar and the times we live in become increasingly difficult, perhaps it's becoming increasingly clear we need connection to something higher. Perhaps salvation isn't just for souls anymore, but for many of us, it's for our lives as well. Are you there, God? In the context of communion with a creator, whoever that creator is for you, suffering becomes a gift. The gift of suffering. Suffering is God's coercion or invitation into eternal light, or the trapdoor out of the limitations of the mind and all of its dastardly schemes. And if the suffering becomes acute enough and one can endure without ending their own life, side note, there are many ways to end a life without suicide as well. Pills, porn, and obsession with the whimsy of the flesh can lead to a walking zombie of a life, no doubt about it. If you can endure suffering to the point where the only option you allow yourself to have is to seek the Father or be present to observe the mind and see it for what it is, useless babbling in the storm, the gift of salvation will arise in fits and starts, of course, with backtracking and missteps, but with dedication and perseverance, suffering itself will reveal itself to be the biggest blessing. Nothing else would have freed us from the cages of our minds. What is the purpose of life? To a big question, state some kind of answer, but my best guess, I can't really answer that big of a question, but my best guess, the purpose of life is to commune with the Father, to allow him to be born within, and a cleansing of these battered souls we are born with, and then to help others find a meaning as rich as that. Like CrossFit for the soul with God as our personal trainer. Do I 100% know that this is how it is? No, I do not. Am I some kind of guru on the mountaintop who has it all figured out? Hell to the no. I'm just a fellow human on the battlefield of life, sharing with you my current perspective. But I can say that when I frame my days with this point of view, my life becomes relatively peaceful, with a kind of momentum that is fun as old demons and limitations fall away and new visions and revelations and inspirations spring up from the bountiful garden. And the fear of the future's inevitable sufferings don't paralyze me so much, but rather hold promise for deeper connections to the one who gave me this unbelievable gift. If that's insanity, let me be insane, but please hold on to your lives. There's so much of a gift out here. I love you. God bless you. And I hope that in some kind of way helped.